Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for registering for this CBAM webinar hosted by the GLCA. Some of you may know us, but for those who don't know us, the GLCA is the Global Legal Customs Association. It's an independent network of customs and trade professionals around the globe, represented in most of the important trading hubs in the world. We've been established since 2007, and we meet once a month digitally to discuss the latest developments in customs and trade. And each year we host a global event organized by one of our members in his hometown or home territory. This year, our annual event will take place in Dubai, hosted by our member Thomas van Hey of Orifair Tax. Besides discussing amongst us those important developments in customs and trade, we also try to share our expertise and share our knowledge or our questions sometimes with a larger audience. And so we try to organize webinars on topics of which we deem that they are important for traders around the world. We had a recent webinar this year on the forced labor ban, which we organized in June. We have now this very timely webinar on CBAM today, with the actual start of the CBAM reporting period, and we're already planning the next one on a also very interesting topic, which will deal with nearshoring, friendshoring, onshoring of global supply chains. And more information on that will follow very shortly. But today we're here to discuss CBAM, and we have a great panel of people to discuss this. We have our president, the president of the GLCA, Ms. Leonor Cordovil, live from Sao Paulo. Thank you, Leonor, for joining us. We have Catarina Belim, our wonderful member of Portugal, who being based in Lisbon, a great expert in customs, trade, and all other indirect taxes, including VAT. We have Christian Salder, based in Munich, also an expert in indirect taxes at KMLZ, dealing with a lot of VAT and customs work already, but also with environmental taxes. And so this CBAM thing comes to our plate, and that's the same with me. I'm Bert Gevers. I was a co-founder of the GLCA, and I'm based here in Brussels. Some practical tips for this seminar. We have planned 2 hours. It's not our purpose to talk you through all complexities of the CBAM regulations in a 2-hour time frame. I think you will be bored at the end. We just have foreseen enough time for discussion. Our presentations target a 1-hour deadline, and then we have foreseen time for discussion. If there's no discussion, we'll obviously finish a lot earlier than the 2 hours that we have foreseen today. This webinar will be recorded, which is also important for you to know. So don't make us laugh or don't make us cry with your questions. And last but not least, if you have any questions, please insert them in the question box, which is foreseen. We'll try to combine questions to separate chapters, and we'll deal with all the questions at the end of this presentation. So thank you very much for participating once again. I can see that you're coming from all over the world, which is always exciting. And you know, we don't want to endure your patience any longer, and I'll suggest that we kick off with the presentation. It is Catarina who will give us a first introduction into the wonderful world of CBAM. The floor is yours, Catarina.
Thank you, Bert. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you, GLCA, for the initiative. I will try to start the presentation. If I can move the arrows, which I cannot. I need help from Christian on this. Here they are. My role here today is to give you an overview of the legal framework of CBAM and where we stand. CBAM was designed, the first takeaway that we should take is that CBAM was designed on the background of already an EU system that already puts a price on carbon, which is the EU ETS system, the emissions trading system currently in place within the EU. This system is in place since 2005. It covers 11,000 businesses from the energy sector to manufacturing sector to aviation. It is a system that is covering currently around 40% of the EU emissions of carbon. And it, aside the EU itself, it covers also 4 other territories, which are Norway, Liechtenstein, Iceland, and Switzerland, are also within the EU ETS. It is known as a cap and trade system. What does this mean? It means that every year there is a cap on the number of CO2 emissions allowed under the EU ETS. The number of emissions is decreasing every year. So since it started, there was already a decrease of 21% in the number of emissions allowed, and by 2030, it is estimated for a decrease of 42% when compared to 2005. Within that cap, all the companies that are under the system need to surrender 1 emission allowance per each ton of CO2 that they issue every year. And this means that there is a trade in place because companies need to purchase the emission allowances that match their CO2 emission every year. Initially, companies aside electricity production companies are given free allocation allowances, but then on top of that, they need to either purchase, or if they have a surplus because they are very efficient, they can also sell them on the market. Because there is a primary auction market for these allowances and also a secondary market, the price is variable on each allowance issued. And in February 2023, there was a hit record of 100 euros per ton of each allowance. It has since come down. Under this system of cap and trade that exists from 2005, the notion started being developed that the system was not sufficient to tackle carbon emissions, and a notion of carbon leakage started to appear. Carbon leakage is basically the cost of producing within the EU and paying a price on carbon intensive goods, meaning that on top of the traditional costs of production, labor costs, material costs, and overhead, you have the CO2 costs. These costs, if they are not applied in a production non-EU, it can mean that effectively non-EU goods can be cheaper and still have the carbon intense embedded emissions that the EU is trying to tackle. And because this carbon leakage became, well, widely known since 2005 onwards, now the CBAM comes into play, effectively wanting to do a level playing field between the production within the EU and the non-EU. And I'm having difficulties changing the slides again, sorry. So CBAM was designed to level the playing field, and this is a leaflet from the State Secretary for Finance of the Netherlands that was issued when the CBAM started to being discussed, and it gives you a wider view of what CBAM aims to do. First, it is set to target a price that is fair from intensive carbon goods, either in EU and abroad. This means that you will match the cost for imported goods in the same amount. So you can see this example. If you have an ETS cost that is 75 euros, and you have a 10 euro cost from a product, the same product coming from a non-EU country, then you will match it with 65 surplus cost to have the same cost from a carbon perspective. If you read also carefully what the European Commission is also stating regarding the CBAM, it states that, well, yes, we want to put the same price on products non-EU and EU, but with this, the ultimate goal is to make it so that companies have a true incentive on having a cleaner production. So if you don't have embedded emissions on products, you will not be specifically targeted with CBAM costs. So what is CBAM in a nutshell? It's a carbon pricing on the import of carbon-intensive goods into the EU. It will have no caps, contrary to the current ETS system. It will have no trading of carbon permits, contrary to the ETS system. It will not cover the countries or territories that are already within the ETS, Switzerland, Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. It will kick off from now, October 2023, with a reporting period that will be further discussed down the line by Bert. And from 2026, importers are expected to pay carbon certificates for non-EU goods that have carbon intensive production on them. From a point of view of the sectors that are covered by CBAM, the first initial sectors are 6 to be covered, and they are the sectors that are viewed as the most intensive sectors for carbon. They are cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, and hydrogen. There are more products coming up down the line. They could be included in a new future, 2025, but they're still being discussed currently, and there is no certainty about them. The current legal framework that we're at is a legal framework that, for a second takeaway on CBAM, it was very quick to get here. So only in December 2019, there was the Green Deal that aims to get EU climate neutral by 2050. And as an intermediate step, it was agreed that by 2030, we would have 55% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And CBAM came along in this target for 2030 in what is called as Fit for 55 package, in which you have a legislative package with a number of legislation, and CBAM is a central part of it, as you can see in the next slide, please. So as you can see, you have 55 initiatives, legislative-wise, that target climate, and CBAM is just one of these initiatives, alongside a revision of the current ETS system and the Energy Taxation Directive. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So CBAM proposal was made in July 2021. And as you can see, it was very quick for the EU Council and the EU Parliament to adopt it and approve it. And a final text on CBAM was reached in December 2022. In May 2023, you have the CBAM regulation published, and the CBAM effectively entered in force in May 2023. In August 17, you had the implementation regulation being published. And with that, you had a detail and a breakdown of the reporting obligations, provisional methodology of calculation of the emissions. The European Commission also did a very thorough work in putting out a number of guidelines and guidances for both importers and exporters and installations, alongside with the Excel sheets that can help assist and calculate the embedded emissions of a given product. And if you read the communicates of the European Commission, there is a true commitment to getting out there the knowledge on CBAM, either by webinars or by guidance or assisting and talking to stakeholders in public consultations. And now I will pass the floor back to Bert to give us the view on what's ahead for the next 2.5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Katarina. And I'll try to move the slides myself, but that does not seem to work either. Yes, thank you. So the question is where we are today. We are the 2nd of October. CBAM officially started the 1st of October. The question we need to know today is, what are our obligations? If we deal in any of the items that fall into the scope of CBAM, what do we need to do as from today? Well, as Katarina explained, we just entered the transition period. And the transition period is, as we have discussed among us when we were preparing this seminar, the transition period is actually the test and trial period, both for operators that need to deal with this new reporting obligation, as for the authorities for whom it is also very new. And we'll see later that in some of the EU member states, the competent regulators have not yet been appointed, or at least have not been published yet. So there's still a way to go for operators, but also for authorities in terms of the implementing of this transitional phase, but there's still time as well. The first deliverable is the report for the first quarter that needs to be updated, or that needs to be filed by the end of January 2024. So for the quarter which starts today, 1st of October, until the end of this year, 31st of December. And then it will be the obligation for people dealing with in products, or people importing, operators importing products that fall into the scope of CBAM to provide information. That is the first obligation, is we'll have to provide information to the authorities on the products, on the items that we will be importing. We will have to provide the embedded direct and indirect emissions, and eventually also any carbon price already paid in the country where we sourced those items. So that is the first step we'll have to do. There's a quarterly reporting that starts today with the first deliverable end of January, and we will see, because we will have included the schedule, that there are several quarters ahead to learn and to improve the quality of that reporting, and member states will learn from that reporting, and member states regulators will inform their operators how they would like to have that information improved in order to come to the final system, as Katarina explained, that will kick off the 1st of January 2026, where you will only be able to import items that fall into the scope of CBAM if you have an authorized CBAM declarant, and if you are able to report on all items required for this CBAM mechanism. And ultimately, as Katarina also explained, more goods could come into the systems, and the EU ETS system will gradually be phased out, so that both systems are ultimately aligned, and that there is a level playing field across the globe between EU producers and EU importers and foreign producers in terms of CO2 emissions. We can go to the next slide. So if you look at the provisional list of national competent authorities that have already been identified, and this is only a short list because these are jurisdictions with whom we deal with a lot. But as you could see, even for Germany, there has not been any formal announcement yet on which authority will ultimately be the competent authority for CBAM. In Belgium, my home jurisdiction, that is already the case. It has been the public health ministry who was appointed as being the competent regulator. Customs, they will also play a role in all major EU member states. They will have a role to provide information to the EU Commission and to the national regulator, and they will have a role in auditing and securing that no goods are imported outside the system that is foreseen here. Guidance is coming in very gradually and very last minute, as we may say. We have all seen that the implementing regulation dates from August 2017. The EU Commission has implemented a scheme for informing operators and also national authorities on their obligations. A first seminar took place, I think, somewhere mid-September, focusing on the cement industry. You could access that seminar or that webinar online. Recordings are available online. There has been a second one for the steel and iron industry, which is, I think, already online. And there are several plans focused on each type of goods, which is which falls in the scope of the CBAM regulation, and there will be a final one only for national regulators that is targeting or at least trying or aiming to explain the obligation for the national regulators in terms of the new CBAM framework. So as you could see, we're still in a very, very early phase. There's an official kickoff date, which is the 1st of October. The first deliverable will be end of January. And in that period, there's a lot of information sharing and teaching that is being scheduled by the EU Commission and perhaps or probably also by the national regulators. As you could see, for now, it's the European Commission which takes the lead here. But we expect that in the weeks and months that come, also national regulators will start information campaigns towards their operators on the specific obligations as they are foreseen under the CBAM mechanism. In Belgium, there's a dedicated website, for example, by the Public Health Ministry, which is called www.climate.be, and that already provides some interesting and additional information on the obligations and the time frame in which they should be fulfilled. You can go to the next slide, maybe. And so in order to establish these, or at least in order to map the obligation in this first traditional or transitional period, I've tried to make this map with all kind of arrows going left and right and under and up. But you see that the four main actors here are the reporting declarant. That's the person that will be liable and responsible for providing the information on the embedded emissions and potentially carbon tax already paid in third countries to the competent authority. So the reporting declarant, he is the key figure. He will have to submit a report which contains all the information which is relevant for CBAM. He will inform customs by means of a custom declaration that needs to be filed upon importation, and he will inform the EU Commission by filing this in this transitional phase, at least, this quarterly CBAM report. Customs, they will verify, they will do a first check, they will inform the reporting declarant on its obligations in terms of the CBAM mechanism, and this information will ultimately be verified and checked by the EU Commission. We will do a general analysis of the report, which do checks, which will share the analysis with the national member state authority. That member state authority might ask for additional information to the reporting declarant, or might share its final assessment of the information with the reporting declarant at the end of the phase. So four important actors here: customs, which is the border agency, and which has a direct view on goods that are imported into the European Union. The reporting declarant, the person who is liable to provide the information, both to customs via a custom declaration as to the EU Commission. The EU Commission, which centralizes all information, which is a direct link between all the national member state authorities, and the EU Commission, which will first do a first check of all the information that it is received under the CBAM reporting, and will share the conclusions and will come to conclusions together with national member state authorities. We can go to the next slide. So who can be the reporting declarant in this respect? And here we'll see that the CBAM regulation refers to customs legislation. So if you are an importer in your own name and for your own account, you will be the CBAM reporting declarant, which is also liable to provide the information on the embedded emissions. If you are not established in the EU and you cannot depend on a direct representative, because you should mandatorily depend on an indirect customs representative, an independent customs broker, then it will be the indirect representative who will be responsible to act as the CBAM reporting declarant in this case. As you could see on this slide, this is a bit more explanation on what I just explained. But once the final system is in place, you should have an authorized CBAM declarant, because otherwise you will simply not be able to import any goods that will fall into the scope of CBAM. How should you register? You should register to the CBAM trader portal. I've tried to do that already this morning, but somehow I got stuck. So I don't know how your experience is, but finally, when you would get through the obligations and all the certifications you need to get access in Belgium, for example, you first need to have an authorization from the Social Security Department before you can enter the portal. So I'm still figuring out how that works. But finally, you know, if you manage to do that successfully, you will end up at this homepage of the CBAM transitional registry, where you can file your quarterly returns and provide all kind of additional information which is required under the CBAM mechanism. The next slide. So here you'll see, and these are the quarters that need to be reported until the final regime will enter into force, as it is foreseen the 1st of January 2026. As of then, there will be a mandatory yearly reporting, where you will report over 1 year, but now under the traditional system, you will have to report on a quarterly basis. The fourth quarter of 2023, which started yesterday, needs to be filed before the end of January 2024. And interesting is, and this just also to highlight the fact that this is a test and trial phase, modifications to that first quarter submission will still be possible in principle until the end of July of 2024, and even then, national member states may authorize even further extended deadlines to modify the information if necessary. And so you could see here that, you know, this is really a test and trial phase. We'll try to obtain the information we will need under the definitive system, but you know, we're learning, and operators are learning, and authorities are learning, and as such, we hope to achieve an easy kickoff of the definitive regimes in the 1st of January 2026. Next slide. So what are your to-dos here? As of, if you have items, goods, which you believe that fall into the scope of CBAM, then, you know, now is the time, now is the moment to see whether they actually fall under the regimes. And how can you know that? Well, you will have to depend on the tariff classification, and based on the tariff classification, as Christian will later explain, you will be able to see whether your product actually falls into the scope. You will have to determine where the information is that you need to report before the 31st of January. If your goods actually fall into the scope, you will have to see what information do I already have and what information do I still need. And in order to obtain the information you still need, well, you will have to reach out to your contract parties probably and see if they have that information readily available and if they can provide you with that information. And for the definitive phase, you will have to see that you have contractual agreements that make sure that your contracting party is obliged to provide you that information, because at the end of the day, it's you, the importer, the CBAM declarant, who will be liable for the reporting. So if the reporting is not correct, or if you fail to report, penalties will be due, and they can, in this transitional system, they can range from 10 to 50 euros per CO2 ton emitted. But it's you as the importer or as the declarant that will be liable for it. So make sure that you know where the information is and that you obtain that information, and try to implement that in your contractual agreements with your suppliers. Check whether there is any exemption that might be applicable. There are exemptions for low value consignments. There are exemptions for certain military importation. This is something that you need to check based on the type of business you're dealing with. Check the country of origin. Check the calculation. You will see in Christian's presentation that calculation is quite a challenge. I myself followed one of the presentations made by the commissions. I think it was for the cement sector. Calculation is really difficult, at least for a lawyer. I'm sure that if there are any engineers in the audience today, they will think differently. But for a lawyer, the calculation of the embedded emission is quite a challenge. Think of values. Think of parties responsible for reporting, etc. There's no formal obligation yet as of today, although the system kicked off the 1st of October. But you need to start doing your homework urgently if you haven't started it yet. I think that's the message that we want to share, because ultimately the 31st of January, this first report on the last quarter of 2023 should be filed. So I think that's it for me. I gladly give the floor to Christian, who was the lucky one who could have the most difficult topic of today and speak about calculation.
Thank you very much, Bert. Yes, indeed, this seems to be the most difficult part, but of course, there is not only the calculation scheme. My part is also dedicated to the reporting obligations as a whole, in order to show you the separate steps that are necessary to tackle all those issues that might be on your way to prepare the first report in January. As Bert already mentioned, there are many aspects to be checked and identified. And to start us off, of course, the question is my business affected at all by CBAM? And needless to say, this is only the case if you are importing goods into the EU from outside the EU. And as already mentioned, there are only 6 items that currently are on the table, but nevertheless, it would be too easy to just say, okay, I'm trading with fertilizers, so actually I'm affected, or my business is affected by CBAM. You should, of course, first of all, check your CN code, the 8-digit customs classification, because the regulation is based on this customs classification, and it mentions explicitly those CN codes that will be impacted by CBAM obligations. This should be one of your first steps, because if you do not deal with this type of products, you're of course not affected by those obligations foreseen by CBAM regulation. However, if you come to the conclusion that you are trading or importing those products, you should dig a little bit deeper. And what you can see here is a 2-column table that shows, first of all, those pieces of information in the left column that need to be mentioned and reported in the transitional period, whereas in the right column you can see what additional information needs to be included as of the 1st of January 2026. And if we have a close look into the box for the transitional period, we will see that there is lots of technical details that you need to know, and these details, this information is not available, at least that is my experience, that easy. So maybe the easiest one would be the CN code, but needless to say, that is the same as like talking about customs classification for customs clearance of goods. Don't rely on the CN codes that are mentioned on paperwork delivered by your provider. Make your own test and check if the CN code is the right one. This is the same for CBAM purposes, of course. And then a couple of things, a couple of pieces of information that normally are not that easy to get. For example, the country of origin, the place of installation, and production routes. So if we are talking about a normal supply chain where this type of information doesn't play any role, you're fine with it. And that is the reason why in many cases, the provider will not provide you with this type of information by default. And of course, in some cases, they even might have an interest in not to provide you with this information, especially if we are talking about complex goods. That means in the sense of CBAM goods that also include semi-finished products that might originate from somewhere else than your provider's installation. The thing is a little bit more difficult and complex as it seems from first sight. And last but not least, you need to have the information if there is any charge, any price on carbon dioxide in the country of origin. So what you need to do here is, of course, first of all, check your supply chain, get in touch with your providers and suppliers, and try to collect all the necessary information. And as I already said, I'm repeating myself, this is a hard job. I cannot imagine from my experience that this will be an easy one, because so many will not understand the purpose of CBAM, the purpose of collecting all this data. And so the struggle starts here. And of course, after having said this, you have to put together all the information that you collected, meaning that you have to calculate the embedded emissions in that product, which is not that easy, as I will show later on. What you also have to make sure is that you have someone who is capable of filing that report to the authorities, meaning that your customs declarant should know about the obligation, that you have to make sure that you have someone putting the data, the information into the system. Of course, as a first step, even have to register and make sure that your registration for the CBAM registry on EU level is open for the 31st of January next year. What I left out now is the right-hand box. So what's going on after the transitional period? So I will get step back to the previous slide, where we are mentioning also additional information that then will be necessary. And of course, talking about a transitional period that allows both authorities and economic operators to learn how the system works and to collect all the pieces of information, to do the calculation, is the one thing. But on the other side, we have to make sure to prepare for the obligations that will come into force as the 1st of January 2026, where we also have to make sure that the calculation can be verified by an accredited verifier that will come into place at that point in time, where you have to provide your calculation to, and the job of this verifier is to double check if the calculation makes sense, is useful or not, and of course also how many CBAM certificates have to be surrendered for the import that you are declaring. All these aspects, of course, should be on the list for you right now in order to be prepared when the final system should come into place. I already mentioned the term of complex goods. There is also simple goods. What's the difference? Where complex good means that you're importing a good with embedded carbon that is produced from several parts and semi-finished products included in that good or product. Simple goods is good produced without any semi-finished product, without any pre-product that is included. And so the calculation, of course, is a little bit different. Complex goods means you also have to do a more complex calculation. And this is, in fact, a rather technical point, at least for all those products, except for electricity, because for electricity, we have an exemption that says that the average price of carbon per megawatt hour is the basis for the declaration. In all other cases, you have to do a detailed calculation. And it is not only the calculation that makes it a little bit complex, it is also the question of methodology. There are a couple of methods that I just wanted to shortly mention to show you that you are in a position, but also in need to make major decisions on the system. A system that you would like to follow and that you are able to follow, because your product or the product that you are trading and importing also defines if there is another method that you could use, just like the standard method that says that you have to determine the quantities of fuels and input materials consumed, as well as the calculation factors such as a calorific value or emission factor. And then you can determine the emissions by multiplying the consumption with the calculation factors. That is the standard method set out in the regulation, and this is a calculation-based method. You could also, another calculation-based method, use the mass balance, which says that you should determine the carbon content in all fuels and input materials, and then determine the carbon content of all output materials. And then you can calculate the difference between input and output, which then helps you to determine the relevant emissions. And this, for example, is a method that is good for goods in which carbon remains, for example, steel. We have another method, and this is called the continuous emissions monitoring system, a measurement-based method, where the greenhouse gas concentration is measured directly in the stack or using extractive procedures, where you measure flue gas flow and determine the emission. That would also be one of those options that you can follow if your type of product allows you to. There's also good news for those of you who say, oh, looks indeed a little bit complex. There is good news for the transitional period, where the regulation also allows you to follow different monitoring and reporting methods until the end of 2024. For example, you can make use of default values, and you can also make estimations of up to 20% of the total embedded emissions. If you are dealing with complex goods, in order to help the system starting, but nevertheless, of course, this is only an intermediate solution, and your final goal should be to be settled for the detailed calculation as presented in the previous slides. Just to give you a short impression on how this could look like. This is taken from the presentation by the EU Commission for the aluminium sector. And this is based on the already mentioned template based on Excel spreadsheet to calculate the direct emissions for the production of a certain amount of aluminium. And of course, you also have to break this down into the different processes for different products, and you have to put together direct and indirect emissions. You can see that in this slide that there is mentioning of direct emissions, also of indirect emissions, which of course play a role, and the total amount shows then the carbon amount or carbon emission that is embedded in the specific amount of aluminium. So I will not dig deeper into this because, as Bert already mentioned, this is something for engineers and technicians, not for lawyers. So this is thin ice for me. But nevertheless, I wanted to show you that if you are responsible in your company to fulfill the CBAM obligations, that things are much more complicated as they seem in a first step, because everyone understands if you say, okay, you need to calculate the embedded emissions, but if you break it down and go into the detail, as you all know, the devil is in the detail, you will come across lots of questions and issues that need to be solved in the next couple of months. So our appeal is, please take care of these issues and try to set up a process in your company, in your organization. And so the next slide is dedicated to the question, who is actually stakeholder with all those CBAM questions? And you can see this is a full range. There are so many departments involved that needs a clear communication and of course also internal guidance. So don't wait too long to define someone responsible for the CBAM process, and try to get all those departments on the train. This is sustainability and environmental issues department, production, procurement, R&D, of course, finance, tax and customs. But there could be much more departments depending on your organization. And talking about tax and customs, that is the part that I think is the most important for all of us. If you have a closer look, there are so many aspects that will be to be dealt with within the finance department and tax department. We just made a short list, but I'm sure that if you break it down, you will come across various issues that are not identified in this list. So our appeal, as I said, is to make it clear to you that we are now at the stage where we cannot say generally, okay, CBAM is right across the street or around the corner, and we got to go. It's much more, and it's rather in the detail. Nevertheless, of course, don't lose the overview and what should be the final aim. So this slide shows you again the travel through the next 2.5 years until you reached, or we reach, the 1st of January 2026. Start collecting data, identify all the stakeholders, make the calculations, try to monitor, report, and also, of course, ask yourself if you can optimize the process that you implemented so far, and make a good documentation, because this is something that holds true not only for CBAM. Documentation is the whole life. Some aspects that I want to highlight to you and summarize from my part is you have to define a responsible person within your organization. That is most important. And of course, you have to identify internal departments and players, stakeholders that can help you. Supply chain management, for example, will play a major role, and try to make clear roadmap with identifying your obligations. Take your business partners into account and contact them, make them clear what the issue is, what you need from them, and then try to put together all this information and check if you're able to fill in and file the CBAM report that will be due end of January next year. You need internal processes, of course, needless to say. You need to identify a CBAM declarant. If it is not your company that can do the job, you need someone who can act as an representative doing the job as a CBAM declarant. You might have to register on the transitional registry. That takes time. You have to apply for the authorization, of course, that is necessary to be an authorized CBAM declarant. That also takes time. Of course, we are in a situation where at least me as a German can say there is not even a competent authority named on national level, but nevertheless, you know, this is always the same. Companies have to make sure that they are prepared, no matter if the authorities are prepared or not. And so if you do this step by step, you hopefully will manage it to fulfill all the obligations that are ahead of us, and are firstly to file the first report end of January next year. If there are questions, what I really must say and can recommend to you is there are two PDFs as a guidance at the mentioned link offered by EU Commission that are really helpful, and they are really comprehensive. One of these documents has over 200 pages, and of course I'm sure that this will not be the end. So I'm sure that not all the questions that you might come across during the preparation period will be answered in these documents, but of course they are helpful. So if you have questions and uncertainties, I think it's worth to check if the solution lies within this guidance, although of course this is legally not binding. And for all of you who are interested in the more technical aspects, as already mentioned, the EU Commission also offers a template based on Excel spreadsheet for the calculation of the embedded emissions, which is rather interesting for those who are not experts, technical experts or engineers. So this seems to be, at least from my point of view, the most important things on the way to get prepared for CBAM and the obligations that come with it. But on the other side, of course, there are doubts if that way that the EU Commission has chosen is the right one. And there are doubts and discussions going on outside the EU if the CBAM regulation is to be obeyed by non-EU players as well or not. And so there's a lot of criticism to be found in the world. And for this part, I hand over to Leonor.
Thank you very much, Christian. Let me just check here if I can go to the slides. 1 second. No, I will need help. Oh, yeah. Yes, I can. Thank you. So thank you very much. Welcome to our network and to our online session, everyone. And good morning from Brazil. It's interesting to hear what Catarina and just to go to the slide here. 1 second. Just to put in the first one. No, I just need to come to the, yeah, thank you. Just to the first one. Thank you. And yeah, it's interesting to hear what Katarina, Beth, and Christian have just said, and see that there is still a long way to go until we know how to operate this mechanism. My impression is that we have a kind of hitting the ground running, and as a Brazilian, as an exporter, I am the one today representing the ground that is going to be hit. So that's my impression. So I'm going to provide the views from outside Europe. And in this regard, I thought it would be interesting to bring some criticism that have been leveled, in special by other jurisdictions, about the impacts of CBAM to the export countries. My presentation will be based, I will be very brief, I have just 3 slides. But my presentation is based on 3 main sources. The first one, some academic articles that bring substance to the debate, and most important, to bring real data and well-founded estimates about the future of CBAM. Secondly, on governmental releases that I could find, stating the opinion of other jurisdictions. And third, on the 187 feedbacks that were received by the European Commission between June 13 and July 17. These comments can be found on the EC website and were submitted by trade associations, think tanks, exporting countries, and companies. Some of them are more related to the open issues that were already mentioned by my colleagues today, but others are really good reflections that so far, in my opinion, have been dismissed by the debates that I have seen. We should remember that the roots of CBAM are based on a Green Deal, as Katarina mentioned, which in turn is the result of several bilateral and multilateral agreements. It means that the initiatives should be not merely European, but the spectrum should be broader. The main scope of CBAM is, to what we understood, to foster global transition dynamics, creating incentives for a global change, not only an European effort. For this reason, I think the reflection is necessary on whether CBAM is, when entering into force, is really tackling the correct incentives, and most importantly, the trade-offs to Europe and to other countries. But let's first understand the effects of CBAM to trade flows and to European itself. And here in this first slide. The first aspect that I found of criticism is the lack of studies about the consequences of CBAM over the competitiveness of European products. It's not difficult to conclude that, and we can conclude that beforehand, that industries directly affected, included in the first list of 6 sectors, gain when the imports of competitors have an increase in prices, right? So due to the taxation, we'll have an increase in prices, it's natural, and then the imports of the competitors, European companies, will gain from this. However, on the other hand, other sectors are going to suffer when they have their raw materials exactly on that list. Meaning, for example, if European imports are more, if Europe imports more expensive steel, the European steel industry is going to be happy. On the other hand, if civil construction, for example, that depends a lot on steel, is going to suffer with the increase in prices, right? To the extent they will be affected depends on the elasticity of the markets and the structure of the product value chain. If suppliers are price takers, all the carbon value should be embodied in the selling price, depending on the international availability of the product at that moment. When it happens, European end consumers may pay more. There is a study that I found saying that when the prices of a ton of a carbon reaches 25 euros, there is a significant drop in both imports and exports of 10% in some sectors. When it happens, prices go up by 5%, which can be a lot depending on the industry. Secondly, another very important criticism that I found in many feedbacks that were granted to the EU is about the risk of circumvention, that it's going to change what we imagine, what we know as exports to Europe of this list of products, at least in a first moment. Bert mentioned that there is in fact mechanisms understood to avoid circumvention, but so far there is a lot of blanks that need to be filled in. It's not clear the likelihood of reallocation of emissions between different production factors, sectors, and companies. Some authors have estimated that it's between 50 and 80% of the aluminium sector, for example. I will give you two examples of what may happen. First, it's a slight modification of goods to fall into another combined nomenclature classification, the European nomenclature classification. So you modify a little bit of your product, and then you fall in kind of another product, and then you escape from CBAM. And the second possibility is an artificial split of shipments to benefit from CBAM exceptions, as low-value shipments below 150 euros, for example. So you have small fractions of products imports that escape from CBAM, and the idea is that we'll have a lot of exporters thinking about how to split the containers, how to split the volumes of exports to fit in these exceptions. But going to the next slide, Christian, please. This slide. So can we go to the next one? Yeah, please. Thank you. So this slide refers, no, the last one, please. Sorry. This slide refers to the possible external. I need to go. Yeah, no, not this. The other one, please. The last one. Yes, thank you. This one. So this slide refers to the possible external and socioeconomic constraints of developing countries, as they have lower capacity to adapt to the productive structure to new reality. In fact, there are huge differences among countries. It does not matter really if the country pollutes, it just matters the presence of the industry itself in the country. The national impact, in my opinion, will depend on impact of the product to the economy. When I was preparing this presentation, I found this figure here on the left side that you can see. It shows exports of CBAM products to EU countries in 2019. As you can see, it's very difficult to see. I should say that, but you can see in the left side and right side. On the right side, you see exports by representation. On the left side, you see export by value. And the right side, you can see export by representation by percentages. When you compare both sides, the most impacted in terms of volume are Turkey, Ukraine, China, and Russia. When you look for example, Bosnia and Mozambique, in the left side, you find them in the middle of the chart. When you look for them in the right side, you will find them in the bottom. And why? The reason is simple. It's because Mozambique has 20% of its exports in aluminium, so it's probably the most impacted company of the planet. So it's interesting to see that when we have these differences between the countries, when we have differences among the countries, it does not really mean if the country is polluted or if it has special policies for environmental issues, or what matters here is just the amount, the volume of products that this country is going to export to Europe, how dependent the country is of this volume. So going to the last slide, please. I would like to touch upon the compatibility of CBAM with multilateral rules. Some feedbacks, for example, that I found in the EU side from South Africa and Argentina, for example, reminded Europe that the mechanism may not be compatible with WTO rules, and it's not justified under the exceptions of GATT Article 20. It would representing, according to the South African, and I'm not going to read this part because I think I need to be fair, but it said it's a disguised restriction on international trade, imposing a technical and administrative burden on foreign producers and importers, combined with a pending details and limited time for adjustment, which means that according to most countries that submitted feedbacks, it's not only the fact that it's against the WTO rules, but it's also a lot of blanks that need to be filled, meaning that a lot of questions that everybody has that were not answered, and now the mechanism is in effect. In a nutshell, according to these countries, it would be against the most favored nation and the national treatment principles that we know from the WTO, because it could discriminate European emissions against non-European ones, and possibly discriminate between importers. So if the proceeding is not well established, we could have huge discriminations, we could have huge impacts between countries, and it's not solved by the mechanism, and because of that, it would be against some of the most important principles of international trade nowadays. Unfortunately, what we can see from the criticism, and this is my conclusion, is that the CBAM is entering into force in a non-amicable conditions, which is against what we expected from a mechanism that needs to be compliance that needs to compliance from several players. Fight, in my opinion, climate changes and what is happening in our planet should be everybody's task, and building a development-friendly CBAM is key to success. If we don't have all countries involved, really understanding the proceeding and really understanding the rules, probably we'll have a lot of circumvention, probably we'll have a lot of discussions, and there will be possibly some WTO discussions in the future that that will possibly affect the mechanism and the policies that are really needed from everybody because of the situation of climate changes that we are suffering. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much, and I'm open for the discussion.
Thank you, Leonor. Extremely interesting to get the view from outside the European Union. Meanwhile, it seems that we have quite a few questions received. If you don't mind, I'll try to take a few. I think we can still take some minutes of your time to discuss these questions. Maybe the first question that was raised, in which country a CBAM declaration should be submitted? Is it the country of importation or the country of establishment of the importer? Christian, is that something that you will answer, or Katerina?
Yes, sure. Well, it is actually not a national report. You have to file that CBAM report via the CBAM registry that is provided by the EU Commission. However, of course, you also have to include, once the transitional period is over, additional information in your customs declaration. So it's actually, if you'd like to say that, the place of importation that is decisive for further declaration, but the CBAM report itself, how we try to present it to you and explain it to you today, is to be filed on the CBAM registry.
Thanks, Christian, and I hope that is clear. Another question that was raised deals with the fact whether CBAM only deals with commodities or also with finished products. I think the person who raised the question referred to steel lunch boxes. Would they also fall into the scope of CBAM? Maybe you, Katarina, can give some more guidance on this.
How I understand it is that it all depends on the. So you have a list of commodities that's in the regulation. That is the commodities that you need to look up if they are covered or not by CBAM. And so it will all depend on the classification of the lunchbox, I would say. If it would fall under one of the on one of the CN codes that is covered, then yes. But how I view it, it would be separate it will all depend on the classification. But yes, these goods could also be covered. It will all depend on how the European legislation views them.
Yeah, so basically, indeed, it focuses on commodities, but there is a clear list of customs tariff codes which you should observe in order to determine whether your products fall into the scope, yes or no.
And some intermediate products could be covered.
And there's the risk of circumvention, which we discussed, because as we know from customs or from anti-dumping rules, whenever there is an anti-dumping on a specific customs code, there are inventive people who try to avoid the anti-dumping by trying to reclassify the products they are importing, and you can expect that this will happen as well in the framework of CBAM, especially when the definitive system enters into force in 2026. Another question that came in, is there this risk of countries legally acting against CBAM, and are we sure that the definitive system will actually enter into force in 2026? I guess this is more a question for Madame Soleil, but you come closest to Madame Soleil, Katarina, so maybe you can answer.
If there is a risk, yes, and even within the EU itself, some European members have already raised the question of whether or not it is in line with the EU jurisdiction itself, and I think it will be put upon the ECJ to decide. So there is an effective risk on this. And as for if it will enter into force or not, from what we've seen from the European Commission and the speed that the legislation took into place, it all sounds like it will be, like Leonor was saying, unilateral enforcement of the legislation. Whether it could be stopped by the European Court of Justice or even the WTO, it's up for only the future knows. I see it coming into force, and then at least from a policy, environmental policy, it will certainly raise some measures from other countries, certain countries, that will try to reduce their carbon emission standards, while still fighting for it to not be imposed. But I do believe that everyone will feel the impact of it. So in my modest opinion, it will come into force even if not legally binding. It will have its effects on the world as we see today.
And
if
what
I
about,
may, Ben.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
I was going to extend the question to you, Leonor. So
yeah, no, thank you. Just a question, just a comment here, because when I was reading the feedbacks, it was very interesting, and I encourage people to read, because it's not us speaking, it's not the European Commission, it's the countries speaking. So many of them are really bringing the topic of possible threats to the EU, and in terms of to revise the proceedings. So some feedbacks are really strong in the sense that they are really asking the Commission to reevaluate whether the mechanism should enter into force now or not. asking them to postpone, ask the Commission to postpone the mechanism in the countries to think twice. And most importantly, mentioning WTO and mentioning International Forum as a way to solve possible questions. So I think, I believe that we should see something in the near future. I do believe, and I think you should be prepared for that, because there are really strong feedbacks on this. There are really strong feedbacks on this.
Okay, thank you, Leonor. I think we already touched upon penalties, etc. I think that from my perspective, I spoke about the test and trial period as the transitional period. So, you know, everyone will be learning, both the operators as the authorities. But do we face any penalties in that respect, Christian, already, or are penalties only for the second and definitive phase of the regime?
We also have, in fact, some regulations for the non-compliance with the CBAM reporting obligations, and the penalties are, as already mentioned, Bert, between 10 and 50 euros per ton that are not, for whatever reason, reported. But of course, we have to keep in mind that as long as there is no competent national authority, there is no one who could put this penalty, and of course, I would expect that even the regulation stipulates that penalties, most of the authorities will be cautious with these penalties, and that you actually, as an operator, would have to beg to be penalized, at least for the next 2.5 years. That will, of course, be different as of the 1st of January 2026.
Okay, thank you. Then maybe one last question. Here is the question about harmonization, and I can really understand the question because it's, you know, a bit a challenge for all EU-wide measures and regulations. I'm, you know, only this morning I was dealing with the new restrictions on steel and iron imports from Russia, whereby importers need to demonstrate that the products they are importing are not of Russian origin. Also there we see that 27 member states have 27 different interpretations on which proof can be submitted, despite the fact that there is guidance from the EU Commission, which is, I admit, not always very clear in that sense as well. But do you expect, you know, same or similar issues here for CBAM? Is there anyone that can bring some light to this ever returning question when it comes to EU regulation?
If I may, I believe we will have it, because you see from the national competent authorities, they come from different backgrounds. We have customs authorities, we have health authorities, we have environment authorities, and the same question, depending on the nature and background of the authority, can have a completely different answer. That is the case even within customs authorities itself. So if you extend that to multiple different authorities, there will be different interpretations on well, penalties and how to report, and if it was well complied with or not. Classification of the goods probably. So I think we can anticipate that there is a long way in harmonizing an interpretation of multiple questions that will come up down the line.
Okay, that's clear, Katarina. Any final questions or perhaps any final comments from our panel? We are reaching the 90-minute limit here of our webinar. Still 1 minute or 2 minutes to go. Christian, any final recommendation for importers that fall into the scope of the CBAM regulation?
Well, actually, in a nutshell, I'd like to summarize this webinar. The next 2.5 years will be strenuous. They will have lots of hurdles and obstacles, but in the end, I think that the EU Commission made a good decision to grant this transitional period of 2.5 years, and all those companies trying to make the best out of this transitional period will be settled for the 1st of January 2026, when the whole system gets final and will have its process in good order and in place.
Okay, wonderful. I couldn't have given a better summary, Christian. So thank you very much to all the audience who participated today, who got up early to listen to us, who stayed up late to listen to us, or just took some time during the afternoon when you were in Europe to discuss these developments in CBAM. It's an ever evolving topic, so we will be sharing new updates probably in the months that come, and share some experiences of us and our clients dealing with the new reporting obligations. So stay tuned. Stay also tuned for our next webinar, which will deal with nearshoring, onshoring, friendshoring, and all other hot topics in the supply chain. We really enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed it too. If there are any questions left, do not hesitate to reach out. If you would like to receive a copy of the presentation, I guess that's also possible. Feel free to reach out in that respect as well. So thank you all. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Leonor. Thank you, Katarina, for this webinar, and we speak each other very soon. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.